So this is Ian's definition. The best life for every one of us, I believe, is where we use our skills and our experiences to positively impact the world. It's where we find contentment and fulfillment. And it's where we are vulnerable, trustworthy, honest, kind, generous, whatever. On the left side, at birth, we have a number of those qualities. We're vulnerable, we're open, we're honest. And in the middle, a whole bunch of life experiences hit us. Most of them are negative, some are positive, but it could be relationship breakdown, it could be abuse, it could be this drive for materialism and that. And I feel that for many of us, we lose all focus on what our best life is for us. And we get caught up in this. And we're not content. It's not the better car, the better boat, or any of these other things.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flip That Shit. I'm your host, Stacey Uhrig, and my guest today is Ian Westmoreland from Australia, which we're really happy to have him. Before we get started, I just want to remind you guys what the premise of this entire website is, or this entire podcast is about. As a trauma recovery coach, I know that many people walk with depression, anxiety, this sense of extreme overwhelm. And after working with so many people, one of the things that I know for sure is that a lot of this disconnect, which leads to depression and anxiety and despair, comes from us being taught that we shouldn't share our life challenges. You know, we've kind of grown up knowing that we shouldn't air our dirty laundry, that there's shame in people knowing that we have struggle. But what I know for sure is that life is struggle. Life is a series of experiences that are divinely designed specifically for us to have the journeys that we're meant to have in this lifetime so we can transform into the purpose and the person that we're supposed to be. And so if you're listening to this interview today and you feel connected to Ian's story, that's my goal. My goal is that one person listen to the guest, feel a connection, feel inspired to share, step away from that dark corner of shame and secrecy, expose whatever challenge you have, because life is challenging. It's okay. And maybe even connect in a way that you haven't felt connected, because that could be the first step towards regaining back to your sense of self. So as part of my search for podcast hosts, I go out to a lot of random places because I like to interview random people. Because what I know, again, is that we all deal with these stories. We all deal with challenges. So if I can randomly pick individuals from across the world, even Australia, you'll be able to see that our challenges are actually global, right? It's not unique to you. So I'm going to read to you a little bit of a story that was sent to me by Ian, and then we're going to let him kick it off. And this is what he said. It's Tuesday, the 10th of September, 2013. My early morning train approaches the station in Sydney's northern suburbs. It is here where I step aboard to take my regular journey to the office as a part of my normal work week. And as my station is one of the first on the line, the platform traffic is usually light, so I'm always able to sit for the entire journey. Ian, tell us the rest of that story and why it is that you sent it to me.
I sat down on the train and I continued to read a book that my youngest daughter had given me. And what I read that morning just transformed my thinking. And so that was on the 10th of September, 2013. In May 2014, I quit my high-paid job as an IT manager, and I've been a full-time volunteer since then. And I felt led to start mentoring. So I started mentoring high school students in Sydney. And then in addition to that, I started mentoring primary school students in some of the local schools. And then in 2018, I was mentoring a young guy in one of the Sydney high schools. In a meeting I had with him, he shared that his father had suicided. his mum was an addict who was in and out of rehab, and he was living with his grandparents, which he hated. And then he just turned and he looked at me. He started crying, and he said, "Ian, help me." And I mean, what can you do? What can you do? And I debriefed with the program counsellor later, looking for some ideas, guidance. And she surprised me. She said, "Ian, are you okay?" And I just started crying. And I was flat for a couple of months. And it suddenly occurred to me, I actually needed to have a mentor just like these tens of kids and others that I've been mentoring myself. So I looked around, Google's searched for the nearest organisation who provided life mentoring. I should clarify, mentoring such a broad term. For many people in business, they assume it's someone with acquired skills, knowledge, experience who guides, directs, advises someone else. But that's not what I'm talking about. Life mentoring is predominantly listening. It's supporting. It's encouraging. I wasn't broken. I didn't need fixing. I just wanted to be validated. I wanted to be actually heard. And so I looked around for a newest organisation like that, was disappointed to find there was nothing suitable in Australia. I actually looked worldwide. I could find nothing along the lines of what I was after, which is a free life mentoring program for men. So it motivated me to write a proposal to establish an organisation like that, which was in effect to become Mentoring Men. And wrote the proposal. A couple of weeks later, I actually got an invitation to go to a local event hosted by our local federal government minister. And in this event, the minister shared about his father's suicide over 20 years ago. Unbelievably inspiring, impacting talk. And I don't know why, but I took my proposal to that meeting. As soon as he finished talking, I went up. I made a beeline for him. He saw me coming. And I said, that was hugely impacting. But where was the support that could have prevented your father getting to the point of suicide? And I shared a little bit about what I'd been thinking. He said, "Ian, this is great. Come and talk to me." And I went and saw him a couple of weeks later, explained what I was proposing. He was incredibly supportive, agreed to sign on as an ambassador, and that was it. I then committed to do everything within my power to make Mentoring Men happen. And honestly, I totally underestimated how much work was involved with that and the lack of skills that I had. All of a sudden, I needed a constitution. I needed to be a lawyer. I needed to be a social media person. But after a relatively slow start, it just boomed. And thousands of men within Australia have engaged. So the program, Mentoring Men, is essentially, it's a free program. We train up volunteer men through our own mentor training course and also through suicide prevention. And then we carefully match them to another bloke, we call men in Australia blokes, who may be having life challenges like job loss, which is often a huge issue for men. It could be relationship breakdown, it could be addiction, loneliness, isolation. And Stacey, things you talked about around just anxiety and depression. So that the program boomed. I was working 7 days a week, long hours doing that. And at the end of last year, we had sufficient support funding that I was able to step aside from running the operation to be able to put a team. There's a team of about 10 people who now run Mentoring Men in Australia. And my dream, because I looked overseas as well, there's the issues we experience in Australia with the suicide rate of men being 3 to 4 times that of women. Interestingly, when men are going through separation, it's 12 times that of women. The studies that we show that there's an epidemic of loneliness. So we have a lot of social issues which I assume would be very similar to the social issues in most Western countries. So I stepped aside, still involved on the board, still a director for the program. And that freed up a little bit of time, which is always dangerous for me. I mentioned pre-broadcast, I have 12 grandkids and I love spending time there. So there's a bit of time there, but then there was some thinking time. And I thought back to an idea I had in the early 1990s. I love reading people's stories, particularly inspiring stories. And I feel that a lot of the growth I've had from stories like Nelson Mandela, people like that, have had a huge impact on me. And I thought, if we could capture the stories of people who'd been through adversity, successfully navigated, you talked about it before, that could provide hope and inspiration to others. And at the time, I certainly didn't have the self-confidence, time or money to do that. But I documented the idea and I sent it to 3 Australian community leaders, just letting them know, hoping they would do something. And one of them, if Australian people would know this guy, he's fairly famous, a guy called Dick Smith, sent a handwritten note back to me. He said, it's a great idea. And then he added, you do it. So it sat there for 30 years. And now about 6 months ago, I decided I'm going to do this, like mentoring men.
Well, I think this is where you and I connected because, I had put out this call for podcast guests on a forum. You landed in there with another 100 people. And when you and I spoke not too long ago, you shared this idea about Kintsugi heroes. And it was so much in alignment with this podcast, which is really just sharing stories of adversity and how did you come out from the other side. But before we get into Kintsugi heroes, I have a question for you. And the question was, you mentioned that you were on this train and that you read a passage in a book on the way going to work. And within 6 months, you left your career because of this passage. And I think it's important for people to know, what book were you reading and what was the passage?
Okay. I get asked this question a lot, and I always paraphrase what I'm going to say by the programs I've set up are secular. We don't care what the background, beliefs, any aspect of the people who engage in them. Personally, I'm Christian. The book I read was a Christian book.
Yeah.
And in the lead up to the 10th of September, I'd been increasingly thinking that there's more to my life than just making money and delivering software changes. And the book was from an American pastor. His name is Steve Uhrig, and the book was Sun Stand Still. And on the page that I read that morning, it queried the meaning of life basically for Christians. And he started listing things. And each of the things he listed, I was ticking off. I've got the book. I should have had prepared this. So here's the book.
Okay.
And this is what I read. So remember, it's key to remember this is the 10th of September 2013. I'll come back to that. And he's challenged me. We feel like we're living our part, doing our part as long as we live decent lives, sort of tick. Stay out of trouble, sort of tick. Pay taxes, tick. Have babies, have 4 kids. Make a living, buy a boat. I even had a boat. And then it said, hit age 59 and a half, collect retirement, die. Now, I was born on the 10th of March, 1954. I was 59 and a half to the day that I read that.
Okay, so let's just stop, because if you're listening and you're not getting a chill from the toe to the head, because I have a chill going through my whole body, because you are a man of faith. And I think we even discussed it. I was not raised with any particular religion, but you are a man of faith. And I believe that we all have things that we connect with that are a higher source and a higher meaning. And did you just feel in that moment that God was speaking directly to you?
Absolutely. And I've shared that many times. Many people come back, oh, Ian, it's a coincidence. But that was the first of many things like that continue to happen. And my own experience is that as I start to move in a direction in life, amazing things happen. And in fact, I shared this week, because I meet so many people, we call it analysis paralysis. They want to do something, but they're not moving. And the example I give them, you can't steer a stationary boat. The boat needs to be moving. But as I've stepped out in faith, if you like, or stepped out along the path I feel that I've been called to do, things happen. I was on ABC, which is the major broadcaster in Australia, radio yesterday, and it came just because there was an article in a small country newspaper. Someone saw that, and they within the next 24 hours, I'm there talking about the second project. So I saw that, and that was the first point. 3 or 4 days later, we went for a walk. My wife and I went for a walk to the local cafe. We're sitting down, having a coffee. She saw some people on another table. She knew. She went over, spoke to them. When she came back, I said, "Oh, who was that?" And she said, "Oh, that was the scripture teacher of the daughter who gave me the book." So I went over to the table, started chatting to her, and the goodness that just radiated out of this woman, this love of humanity. And she shared 2 key things. One, she and her husband were running a support group for young mums, basically single, generally teenage mums who are obviously under a lot of pressure. And they would put on a brunch, a breakfast, lunch, free. And it was just to support these young women, get a community going. And she said, "Ian, we can't keep up with the demand. We're turning young girls away." And I said, "Well, look, I've just got this message to do something. I don't know what it is." So for the next few years, my wife and I funded that group for a second day for years. That group's still running. It's been running for about 15 years. The other thing that this woman mentioned was mentoring, high school mentoring. And as a result of that, and given my brain was fertile, thinking, well, there's what is it? What does it do? My wife and I both did the mentor training course, and then I started down the path, and that's led to mentoring men.
So one of the things that's going through my mind is something minor that you shared when you started telling me that you had read this book. And what you said was, prior to reading this book, I was starting to think, is all I want to do is make money and make software changes. And what I'm constantly sharing with my clients is whatever you put out to the universe, you are met with. And it's like this concept of ask, believe, receive. You weren't necessarily saying to God or the universe or speaking it out, saying, I want to change and I want A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But you opened a door by even thinking, is there more to what I'm doing? The moment we open the door and ask, whether it's intentional or not, we're actually putting out a frequency that is almost like a radio signal to be met. The next piece is believing that you're worthy to do the more, right? Or to engage in whatever it is you really, really want. That belief is really important, knowing that you're worthy for it and open to it. And then we sit back and receive. We don't do it intentionally, but what you're describing is a perfect example of that. You had a thought process that was different than the thought processes you had in the past. You know, raising 4 children, it's like, I have to be responsible. It's 40 hours a week for 40 years for this company, and I'm going to make XXX, and then I'm going to, at least here in the States, earn 40% in retirement. Like, that's the way it always is, and that's the way we're going to go. So you don't even have the opportunity to think outside of that loop until you do. And it might even feel scary, like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I thought that. That's not going to be possible. But maybe you thought, what if?
Stacey, can I share a story? Because that just really resonated with me. In fact, when we connected, I was actually in Europe with my wife, and we were, at one stage, we were on this pirate-type ship with going around amongst the Greek islands, and we get off, and with a group of people, number of Americans, we would ride around the Greek islands on our push bikes with a tour guide. At one point, we're on one of the islands, and the tour guide stopped us, and he pointed to an island where Onassis lived, and he owned the island, and he started talking about Onassis, and he started talking about Onassis as being incredibly successful. He talked about how he was born into poverty, how he started making money in the black markets with tobacco, and then he invented packaged cigarettes. Made an absolute fortune, got into shipping, married Jackie Onassis, and he finished up by saying that Onassis was quoted to say that they say money can buy love. I want to tell you that's wrong. I'm the richest man in the world. I've never really found true love. And I put my hand up and I said, I just want to query your definition of success. So you've got a man who's invented a product that's killed millions of people and never found true love. I would argue that someone poor who had strong family connections is far more successful than Onassis. When I came back to Australia, I woke up jet lagged at 4 o'clock in the morning and started, I don't know why, but I started thinking about this meaning of life again. And I put it together a one-page PowerPoint just for my benefit, but I've now shown hundreds of people. And if I can just indulge for a minute, on the right-hand side, I've got a picture of a target, and I've called it the best life. So this is Ian's definition. The best life for every one of us, I believe, is where we use our skills and our experiences to positively impact the world. It's where we find contentment and fulfillment, and it's where we are vulnerable, trustworthy, honest, kind, generous, whatever. On the left side, at birth, we have a number of those qualities. We're vulnerable, we're open, we're honest. And in the middle, a whole bunch of life experiences hit us. Most of them are negative, some are positive, but it could be relationship breakdown, it could be abuse, it could be this drive for materialism and that. And I feel that for many of us, we lose all focus on what our best life is for us. And we get caught up in this. And we're not content. It's not the better car, the better boat, or any of these other things. And what I hope to do, even just through this little conversation, is if I could just get someone to pause for 10 or 15 seconds and maybe think, well, what would my best life be like? Because they're all going to be different. And what you was saying before, once they start thinking down that path, things can start to happen. And so I had
doors open up. The moment you put out to the universe this new wave, if you will, of thinking, this new frequency, this new opportunity, the universe's job is to meet you where you are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if that's where you're putting it, all of a sudden things are going to start to shift. And you said, oh, now I'm meeting the scripture teacher's wife, and this is who gave me the book, and now we're supporting these people. And 3 days prior, that wasn't even out there because that wouldn't have even been on your radar.
Yeah, we're of one accord here. I think if listeners just start thinking about that, start moving, and just see what happens. And from my own perspective, the last 3 or 4 years have been easily the most fulfilling time of my life. Just absolutely blessed. And I know I've met a lot of people going through extremely difficult situations. Life varies between us all.
Now, would you say that it's because you've had these experiences with all of these individuals that you got encouraged and inspired to share stories of adversity and challenge? Because that's where mine comes from. You know, I love being able to share with people it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And it try to take the shame away.
Absolutely. I went to a book writing course as part of the Kintsugi Heroes. We'll be producing books as well as podcasts. So I went to this how to write a book workshop. And one of the questions the workshop host said, who's this book for? Who are these? Who's going to read these adversity stories? I said, it's everyone. And she said, not good enough, Ian. Narrow it down. But I said, everyone has different adversity. After I thought about it for a few hours, I realised the target is Ian. It's me. It's the person who was judgmental around things like gender diversity, who was judgmental around addictions and things like that. So what I want to do through the podcast and through the book is obviously provide hope and inspiration to people who may be experiencing similar challenges. But I want to help educate the broader community, the Ians, about these types of issues and how best to support them. If you mentioned addiction to me 4 or 5 years ago, I would have assumed that addiction was just drugs and alcohol. But it's not. Most of us are addicted in some way or other to different things. It could be overeating, it could be undereating, it could be pornography, it could be a whole bunch of different things. And I'm working with an ex-addict, and we're actually putting together a themed program around sharing stories around addiction.
I have a question about that. 2 questions. Number one, what changed your view on that? But more importantly, did you make a judgment about who was addicted?
So what changed my judgment was just being open-minded enough to actually hear another view. And I feel one of the challenges in the world today, and social media has just fed this, people associate with a group that reinforces a particular view they have and takes them further left or further right. And I love the analogy of picture a wire that almost goes between 2 extreme points. Yes, no, black, white, positive, negative, but never gets there. Put a bead on that wire. And as you have discussions with people, take in that information, you move that bead, but it never gets either fully left or fully right. And some of these people who've got these entrenched views, if I were to ask them, what would you need to hear? What information would you have to have before you changed your view? Some of them would say there's nothing you can say that would change my view. And to me, that's a very foolish stance to take.
Don't you think that that's the ego? I mean, when I hear that, I think to myself, that's the ego part showing up that says, I'm actually afraid to change my point of view, because if I were, then I'd have to go back and tell all these people who I was so staunch in my view on that I'm not a perfect person and that life is actually fluid and I have the opportunity to change my mind. But really, I think people are so worried about other people's points of view that they're not willing, and they're willing to stay strong in something and not even possibly learn, but it's all out of fear. It's fear about being judged. It's fear of what would it look like if I believed something else. It's fear of not controlling a known outcome because this is a territory I'm not familiar with. And so people stay small.
It comes back to vulnerability, the Brené Brown talk. And
yeah,
it's, how sad is that because of how they, maybe it's a self-confidence thing, they'll look less in, I think they'll look less in other people's eyes. I was wrong on so many different things. My attitude has changed. Princess Kate is one of the ambassadors around addiction. One of the statements she made, no one sets out to become an addict. No one wants to be an addict. What they do, they set out to cover the pain or whatever it is that they're experiencing. I remember I had a chat with a mentor once and who took drugs, and I was trying to get an understanding of drugs. And I said, well, look, I've never taken an illegal drug in my life. And he just looked gobsmacked. He said, Ian, I'm amazed. And I said, well, I'm amazed that you're amazed. But I started talking to people about drugs. And one of the guys said to me once, Ian, if you want to reduce illicit drug usage, stop sexual abuse. And it took me like 5 seconds to make the connection. And as a society, we focus on the symptom rather than the underlying cause, the pain that's there. And I think if people could actually get that message through, they would start seeing someone who's an addict in a different light, in a more empathetic. Yeah.
I always say, I have a book here on my. You pulled out a book. I'm going to pull out a book. This one is called What Happened to You.
Love it.
And the author is Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry. And it talks about adverse experiences in childhood, what we call here in the States ACEs, ACES, and how we are looking at the result. We're looking at the outcome, the addiction, the ADHD, the incarceration, the bad choice making, the behaviors. And we're shaming people for having these behaviors. And we're making them feel worse about themselves. But rarely and hopefully this is going to start to change, and this is what I'm working towards changing, globally, is to start with the question of what happened. And, here's the thing. Not everybody can answer that. I work in the trauma space, and I'm very clear on my website. There are two kinds of people I work with. Those who are very aware of what their traumatic experience was, and those who are unaware. Because I think we all walk with some form of trauma. All of us have had a moment or many moments in our childhood that left us feeling, and the feeling piece is the key word, unseen, unheard, insignificant, unimportant, alone, betrayed, which leads to not enough, not worthy, unlovable. Those three, not worthy, not enough, unlovable, ... will lead to all kinds of behaviors. If we can help people get to the root cause safely, which is what I focus on, that's where my hypnosis comes in. I have a hypnosis practice. When we can get to the root cause safely and actually realize as adults, we were making decisions based on beliefs that we adopted when we were 6, 7, 8 years old, we can start to now move through to the other side and help people make decisions not from the 6-year-old point of view, but from the 36-year-old point of view or the 56-year-old point of view. And that's where peace starts to come in, because now you're reconnecting back to yourself.
Beautiful. And I think the catalyst for that, one of the catalysts, can be actually hearing other people's journeys who are in a similar position.
This is why I do the podcast. I think it's so vitally important. I know I have had this one beautiful woman that I interviewed from England. I've had 3 people since that interview come to me and say, she is my story. And I say, then you should reach out to her. And they have. And some of them have even been coached by her up to this point. Because first of all, there's a wealth of abundance. There's many of us doing this kind of work. And hopefully people will connect with the person they feel connected to. That's the goal, is to try one person at a time, bring less anxiety, less stress, less angst into the world, more peace, because then they'll pay it forward and it will get paid forward, and it gets paid forward. I'd love for you to share this next venture, because it's so tied into these stories. It's Kintsugi Heroes. And we know, for people that don't know what Kintsugi is, Kintsugi, right? Kintsugi. Yeah. When in Japanese, there's an art form of something breaks, instead of seeing it as broken, the idea is to make it more beautiful, right? And all of these fractures are filled in with, what is it, like a gold paste or like a gold liquid?
It's gold. In the true form, I believe it's gold. It goes. The legend is a Japanese emperor had some valuable pottery and it cracked and chipped and broke. And he said to his craftsmen, put it back together so you can't see there was any breakage. And they couldn't. But they could put it back together using gold. And now it is a beautiful thing. It's far more valuable than what it was before. And the metaphor is, as people, we go through adversity, but it actually increases our value to society and the lived experience of being able to support people. So we've already captured a number of stories from people with physical and mental disabilities, gender diversity. The first one we did was on grief, which is something I struggle with, a lot of people struggle with. Got migrants, refugees, Indigenous people, addiction, and the list goes on. And we have a recorded conversation like this with an engaged professional podcast host, a woman with her own lived experience who does that. It's edited into audio, video, podcast, and our official launch is Australia time is next Wednesday. We're doing 2 launches, 7:30 a.m., 7:30 p.m. Apologies for the plug. And I've engaged an author who lives in New Zealand who takes the transcript of the conversations and edits them down into a book. And there'll be a series of books, and some of them will be themed. My wife and I are funding this, but we recently got a grant within Australia to support people impacted by the Black Summer bushfires in an area in Victoria. As you know, Australia was decimated by bushfires a few years. Well, it's a common thing, but the bushfires are getting worse here. And they saw the storytelling as a way of getting the community to help the community heal, we call them heroes, Kintsugi heroes who share their story. And we'll get some book signings going. We'll get some events there. And I think it's a really great thing for the heroes themselves. It's therapeutic, but also for the people who may be holding on to things, particularly men. We've got this stoicism. We've got this confusion around how a man behaves, and they're hurting, but they don't want to let that out because of what you talked about before, Stacey, around the how's this going to look? Am I a real man if I cry and stuff like that? So really excited about that project, and we're hoping there'll be a number of others like that. And the reach, we're doing this for an area in one of the Australian states, but that reach will be for any bushfire impacted area, not just in Australia, but around the world. So capturing those sorts of stories.
It's beautiful. And I want you to share with people really concisely. So it's Kintsugi Heroes. It's KINTSUGI heroes.com.au.
That's the website, right? Which should be live next week in preparation for the...
Yep. But let's just give the date because this is going to launch much later. So what is the date that it'll have launched live?
December.
December
so confusion with the time. So this is Australian Sydney time. So Sydney time, 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 14th, which would be Tuesday evening for people in the States, different times obviously around the world. And there's also another one, 7:30 p.m. on the Wednesday. So it'll be two launch events. We'll have some heroes at the event, sharing a bit of their story. We'll have a bit of fun with that. And the first book will be published in March 2023. But
it's very possible this podcast might not launch until until March 23, because you're in a queue. So it's important for people to know when they listen to this, because I have a feeling that this will go live in the spring, even though we're recording it in December. But the website is live at the time of listening. It's kintsugiheroes.com.au. Hopefully the book is being launched. And if that's the case, maybe we can coordinate and do a part 2 and make it, get it into the queue ahead of some of the other people so we can do it real time for you. But, what I'm thinking as we're talking, Ian, is what a blessing. What a blessing that you actually read the book that your daughter gave you, that you opened up to that page on the day that you were 59 and a half, that you listened. You talk about mentorship, but you listened to yourself and you let yourself guide. A lot of men, and I want to speak specifically to men because this is men mentorship is where you started, could have read that on their 59 and a half birthday, resonated with it, felt it, checked off all the boxes, and then shut the book and put it in their bag and never did anything about it because of all the paradigms and all the core beliefs wrapped around what a guy's responsibility is versus following their passion, their heart, their purpose. It takes tremendous courage, tremendous vulnerability, a lot of probably challenging conversations, but I don't know that not doing it would have worked for you because this is so in alignment with not just who you are, but what's meant for you. Because you've shared, I was judgmental in these spaces. I'm not anymore. I see things differently. I approach life differently. And when people talk about lack of purpose, I think they think too big. Purpose is supposed to be something that you're doing, but really what you're doing, and I'm putting that in quotes for people don't see it, is you're being. You're living your best life. You're living your truth. And you're in alignment and you're in flow because of that. You're not worried about the title. You're not worried about all the things that so many men end up putting labels of success on, as you talked about with Onassis' Island. And you followed your heart. And I truly am so honored to have met you, because I can honestly say you're living your life's purpose, which is incredible.
Yeah, Stacey, how sad would it be if people feel a calling to do something and then for the reasons you said, don't do that? Sad for them. Sad for them missing out on the contentment.
I would say that that's probably the majority. And this is why within the men space, the rates for suicide are higher. You know, the depression is high and probably in secret. You know, the anxiety is significant, but probably in secret. And, you know, I've met a handful of people over the years who really focus on the male demographic because of this. And I think it's really important to whomever's listening. And I'm really happy to say I have quite a few men lined up as guests this year. And that was really intentional for me, because I want everyone to be seen and heard here. And I think if we can have some male counterparts and people who are presenting as male and feel male listening to this, there could be someone that says, I'm on the wrong path. I'm on the wrong track, if you will. I want to be on Ian's track. There's nothing that can stop someone from being on that track except for their own beliefs that it's available to them.
Yeah, they are enough and they are worthy.
100%. Always. It's just the courage to take the leap. The leap is scary. But what's on the other side?
Yeah, I agree. Just start moving. See what happens. Start moving. You can steer when you're moving. Stationary, nothing's going to happen.
No, this has been an honor. I again really want to encourage people to check out kintsugiheroes.com.au. If you're interested in the men mentoring program, can you give us what that website is as well?
.org.au. And both Mentoring Men and Kintsugi Heroes are active on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
And how do they find them there? What are the social handles for those?
I can put...
Like, would you say, like, if someone searches Mentoring Men?
If someone searches mentoringmen.org.au, they will find Mentoring Men. If someone searches for next week, but this, as you pointed out, this podcast will be in the future. So erase that bit. If someone searches for Kintsugi Heroes as one word, .com.au, they will find us. And we're always on the lookout for more stories. So many people want to give back who've been through adversity. And I just thought I'm amazed how many people have been through incredibly traumatic events and see it as one of the best things that's happened to them in life. And I read the story of a young, dynamic corporate woman who was in the Twin Towers when the planes hit. And it changed her direction from trying to climb the corporate ladder, which she was successful at doing, to giving back thing. And it just blew me away. In fact, I struggled to accept it, but she said, I'm so glad I went through that experience. And it's like, wow. So if there's,
I can say that my most adverse experiences in childhood and in adulthood have been my greatest gifts. But you must be open to that. And it doesn't just happen. You know, I've had this conversation with many people, and I'm always very careful when I say these things, because there are a lot of experiences I haven't had that I know locally. A lot of people I know have had the loss of a child, cancer, or some sort of illness that is bringing them to their knees in fear, right? And I don't know what those experiences are like, but what I do know is this: that life really is a series of experiences divinely designed for you. It doesn't mean that the experience wasn't challenging, that there wasn't a negative impact in your life on it. It's not this toxic positivity where everything that came out of it was good. But there will have been something in that experience, someone you met, something you learned about yourself, an inner wisdom that you gained that you couldn't have gained without the experience. And I always try to make that clear. It's not as though we're saying it's the best thing that ever happened to me because everything that came out of it was great. There can be some things that came out of it that you'll never feel good about. But it enhanced your life in a different way that you couldn't have had without that challenge. And so I can honestly say in my own life experiences, and I've had a lot, that the hardest ones I've had have been my greatest teacher.
Beautiful.
And therefore worth it.
Yeah.
Right? So thank you so much, Ian Westmoreland from Australia. It has been such an honor, truly an honor to have you on. You are an inspiration. I am excited for all the men and women to listen to this from all over the world. And I cannot wait to see what you do with Kintsugi Heroes. I know it's going to be amazing.
Stacey, thank you so much for the opportunity to share a bit of my story and get your wisdom in the mix as well. So thank you.
Oh my God. It's been a great, thank you so much.